Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for U Sports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics, continuing with the exit meeting series. This week, we're making a trip down to the Royal City to talk about my Guelph Griffins, your Guelph Griffins, everybody's Guelph Griffins, how this team fared the first year of Coach Saria's tenure there, where they're tracking going into 2025, and so much more. But first, Tom, how the heck are you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing well, my man. I had such an amazing opportunity last week to not only get out to a few different spring camps. I saw the Western Mustangs in a spring camp. I saw the Laurier Golden Hawks in a spring camp, and I got to see the coup de grace. Guelph versus Laurier in an inter-squad practice. My God, it was some of the best football, and it was just the shot of the U Sports football that I really needed.
You've been making your world tour around Southwest Ontario all last week, taking business calls in the truck and doing the Lord's work. And it has been much appreciated, especially given that we're in the home stretch of this series now. And we're talking about those three teams going Guelph, Western, and Laurier. But it starts with Guelph today. A Guelph team that in 2023, the final year of the Ryan Sheehan project, went 3-5, missing the playoffs, flipped that script on its head almost entirely to pick up a 6-2 year this past year with a tight loss, two tight losses. So a year where, again, my goodness, seemingly there was almost no one that they weren't in a game with. In fact, there was no one they weren't in games with this year. And then falling to the Western Mustangs in the OUA semifinals in a terrific ball game we'll cover with. Tom, let's start off the way we do with so many of these. What are your kind of first impression memories when you think back to this 2024 season, year one, Coach Saria with the Guelph Griffins?
I really cannot get over the fact of how much of a change we saw in a team from 2023 to 2024 with not losing a single player. There was not a person that, it was not like some rookies came up and were unbelievable players and they really contributed, whatever. These were the exact same players from 23 to 24. And yet that record of 3-5 to 6-2, I could not see a bigger jump in quality of play than what we saw in 2024. I mean, even just looking at individual games, you remember what happened Guelph versus Laurier in 2023 with Taylor Elgersma going off. And then in this
Six
one
touchdowns.
In 24, it's decided by a special teams touchdown. It's neck and neck. And it's the exact same process. It's the exact same thing, except the coaching staff is different. You know, I had a chance to speak to a number of the Guelph players when I was at that inter-squad practice the other day, and all of them kept saying the same thing. The vibe, the culture, everything is just so much different with these coaching staffs that are in here. And it's not just, it's outstanding that Coach Saria has done what he's done, but it's the other coaches that he's brought in as well. Obviously, Mike McDonald, Brian Clough, those guys are legends in that Guelph community, and they mean so much. But a name that kept coming up to me a whole lot, which I was not necessarily surprised about, but was just surprising to hear from even offensive players, was Coach Matt Barry. They had mentioned that he had been such a positive influence on the program, on the team, really made his presence felt, not just to his own defensive guys, but to the offensive players as well. And I just thought this is one of the best spots that Guelph has been in a very long time, probably since, the heyday of the Stu Lang era. And it's so exciting to see this university really get going. And really, like you said, there is a world here where a couple of bounces here and there, Guelph goes from 3-5 in 23 to potentially 8-0 in 24. So an outstanding turnaround. Cannot say enough positive things about Coach Saria and his entire coaching staff, and what a year that these Guelph Griffins had.
Most definitely. If we want to be entirely fair, there's also 6-2 is the right record because there's a very fair opportunity for this team to be 4-4.
For sure.
Last year, they're in tight ball games on the winning and on the losing end, and that makes all the sense in the world. And I love that you brought up the name of Stu Lang, Coach Lang, because it felt like with Coach McNeil taking over at first, that was a major sea change from who Coach Lang was and how he approached the team. And we got love for Coach McNeil. We had him on. So thankful for that. And he's an incredible coach, one of the best in the OUA. But it was a big mood switch. And then they go to Coach Galloway for that interim period. From folks I've talked about, it felt like, as much as we love Galloway, that was almost never going to be the permanent thing. It was always just trying to, fill the gap. And I think he could have done a great job with it, but just the timing didn't work out well for him. They bring in Sheehan. We don't need to rehash all that. It feels like they have found the guy, which is remarkable because we're now a decade, we're coming on a decade of Stu Lang not being there. And really just to highlight, we talk all the time, and no, I don't want to talk too much about Western on this pod. You had the pleasure of meeting, possibly the GOAT himself and Greg Marshall this past week. Obviously, he's of a special caliber that few can even come and match. But when you look at those coaches who are in programs for long periods of time, who have the success, and then other teams are wondering, like, how do we mimic that? How do we repeat that? And not that there aren't things that you can learn and you can ape. And, our great friend JT Sui always talks about how greatness leaves clues. And I think that's a great piece of wisdom, and I believe that. But there's something about truly great leaders. And I think they found one in Mark Soria that matches the intensity and the vibe of this team. And the thing, if I may just continue on this little just like spiel for a second here, that I think was a interesting thing to balance for Guelph is that I come in 2011 and it's sort of a middling team, a few years off their last Yates Cup visit. Some great talent on that team. It's still the grass field, still very much the U of Moo, and it's the second year of Stu Lang coming in. My second year, the turf comes in. All of a sudden, the helmets, the jerseys, and all of a sudden it starts becoming, and especially when Carleton comes back in 2013, this conversation of these teams that are really maybe stacking the deck and these unfair advantages. And all of a sudden, then when we win the 8s in 15, and then in 2016-17, the pavilion comes in, Guelph goes from this kind of small school, working class kind of image, even if you don't go to Guelph and you're not like one of those true blue rivals, it's like, hey, Guelph had a good season. Hey, good for Guelph. The same way that, I think for a lot of folks, when you see like Waterloo doing well, it's like, nice, Waterloo, way to go, kind of upturning the classic teams that we've been seeing of late do well, to all of a sudden, well, you got the Mr. Moneybanks backing you up. You have the nicest facilities in the whole country. And all of a sudden, it completely topsy-turvies the impression of who you are as a school and that image. And I think that was truly what they were in part trying to reconcile with, is who are we as a team? And I think Soria has that mentality, that kind of laid-back mentality that kind of matches that image that I think Guelph at its core is. And I love Guelph still to this day as a city, and I describe it to people, I'm like, it's a mix of farmers and hippies. That's what Guelph is. So it's a hard working town, but they're also not going to take themselves too seriously. And I think they found the guy in Coach Soria who's going to match that. The guy wears his bloody cargo shorts on the sideline, which is a complete flip of the script of the Queen's influence, completely buttoned up. You bet. I mean, you were a part of that stuff. I don't know if you mind speaking on that? Because again, I think even things like that matter, and we don't need to rehash all those stories of the relationship between Shan and some of the players when it came to some of those aspects of what's appropriate and what's not, and then the kind of coded language that came with that about some of the racialized players. But again, we don't need to dive into all that. But again, I think that aspect does matter when you look at the attitude from the headman of how that then lets the players just be themselves.
100%. When you start looking at how much there was a very clear image in Coach Shan's mind when he came into the Guelph, and that we were going to be clean and buttoned up and everybody was going to be tucked in and kind of away you go. And in that setting of almost like a military type of focus, it is a very clean look and it shows a type of unity. Absolutely. But there's a lot of kids right now that don't really identify with that kind of messaging, and they don't really want to do something like that. They want to have their own expressions of who they are personally. And I think a lot of that is where all of those issues really stem from, and that idea of, I want to be who I am, and I feel like with this, I don't feel like I can truly be who I am, or I can't be as comfortable as I can be when I'm going out and playing. And that's where a lot of that friction certainly started with Coach Shan and his time there. But with Coach Soria, these guys are really able to just be themselves and to have fun and play football. And you can tell it it's not just a, Coach Soria versus Coach Shan, and it's the two unbelievable, between the two of them. Absolutely, there are differences, but it's the fact that Coach Soria has brought in all of the other Guelph coaches who had taken a step back, which is really what's changed this around. I mean, talking with Tommy Barakis and looking over and being like, "Hey, that's the Coach McDonald effect. We're playing a lot better. We're doing a lot of stuff," and going, "Yeah, I know that. If anybody knows that, you and I, Zach, you and I both know that." And seeing Cluffer out there and yelling and screaming and still being as animated as always, and the guys just vibe to it and they come around it. And so the energy on the Guelph sidelines is something that you love to be a part of. There's smiles everywhere, whether they're, winning reps or not. It's still everybody's just happy to be there, happy to be playing football. And that's where Guelph is really at their peak.
And the point of bringing back some of those coaches, Cluffer and McDonald, and again, I don't think McDonald, it's probably up to us to really not just continue giving him his flowers, but to truly, we should just have him on the bloody show. Because I think people used to kind of talk about, well, he wasn't the best, necessarily the greatest X's and O's tactician. It's like, well, if that's even true, look at the players he's able to bring in. So he's out there on the recruiting trail. And then look at the guys he's putting out into the CFL year in, year out in the caliber of O-line. So even if you want to make the knock on him that he's not the best person on that front of it, it's like, but he's still producing the best O-line. So again, he is one of the most important people to this day in my life, and I'm certain yours as well. Tom, let's go through, pardon me, the schedule from last year briefly, because I want to just frame it like this. I want to go through the schedule with you. We'll go through the scores, we can go through maybe a bit more detail in some of the games of being like, when did we know? Like, when was the moment? And I almost feel like I should go through the podcasts from last season to nail down the moment where we're like, oh, we're back, baby. Because for a while, again, and I don't mean to make it about the past, it was a lot of hashtag not my Griffins anymore. I had disowned this ball club, and I was fully back bought in. I think as a product of a preseason pod we did where I was, draped in my Griffin paraphernalia. But they start off the season on August 24th at home against Carleton, a 38-25 affair. That's the game where Tristan Lefebvre gets injured, and it's a Carleton team that really impressed us in that one. But you know what? Guelph comes away with the win. They take the road on the show against U of T, the 47-10 win. The offense explodes. That game against Laurier, you mentioned, cold day. They're going tit for tat, score for score. And then that Tayshawn Jackson kick return at the end of the first half is what seemingly tips the tide. The at the 55 Bowl at Guelph against Mac, it's a 29-24 final score. And like any rivalry game, it would be wrong for it to be a complete blowout. And in part, that score is a product of Keegan Hall marching his team down to the end zone right at the end of regulation. And frankly, they were not that far off an onside kick attempt from giving them a chance to tie it up. So I give them all the credit in the world for that one. That's probably the only time you'll hear me giving them credit in the next little while. The Queens game, we'll probably dive into that one a little bit. They dropped that one on the road. The defense for Queens really showed out. They take care of business at home against Waterloo, 42-25. They go on the road, they then take care of business against Windsor. We talked about that one on the Windsor pod last week, the 45-40 barn burner, which included that kind of strange onside kick attempt after their opening score. And then they take care of business on the road against York to finish up the season 33-19. The offense was good. York was looking really good in that game too. When in that stretch, and I feel like it was fairly early on, were we saying to ourselves, oh, Guelph is back?
For me, without a question, it was the Laurier game. While yes, that was a loss. So to know that Laurier within the first couple of weeks was at the pinnacle of where we were really seeing them. That offense was really coming alive. The defense was stingy and everything. And then to be at that game live in person when you and I in the end zone watching from the end zone cut and saying, man, Guelph is not out of place here. Guelph belongs to be in this game, and they are holding their own. If not for, like we said, that score is completely divided essentially by that 7 points, which was a special teams touchdown. If that doesn't happen, that's a whole lot closer. Who knows? But it did happen, and that's the case. But like right there in it with the nation's best offense, with one of the best defenses that was there, and not backing down a single bit. I don't want to ever hint that a team had a defeatist kind of mentality or whatever. But once again, in that 2023 season, after like the second touchdown that Taylor throws, I think everybody's kind of looking around like, holy crap, we got to stop the bleeding here as best we can. And not this idea of, okay, you just scored, now we got to swing another haymaker and come back to this, which is what we saw. So it's got to be that week 3 game against Laurier. That's really where I was, eyes are open. Yeah, Guelph is back.
I think you're right. I feel like I was probably slightly extra bullish coming off the U of T week. One of perhaps my favorite sound bites of my own was "Give me Guelph on the road, baby," going into Laurier, and I was proven incorrect on that one, and I certainly heard it from the fans in Waterloo on that day. I think you're absolutely right, especially with how potent that offense was for Laurier. Because one of the things we always tout about how great our Canadian game is, how much better of a game it is than the Americans, is that like you're almost never out of it. But
Mhm.
we've seen with how good Laurier is, a la the Yates Cup last year against the Western freaking Mustangs, that they can put you to bed pretty early because they're so darn good offensively. And I think a big thing for Guelph. So I think that was huge, as you said, to stay score for score and be able to show that you're here, you're ready to sit at the table with the adults here. And I think we got to now talk about, I think we got to talk about Tristan Aboud
Yeah.
right now because, hey, look, my guy Jazz Lindsay, me and Jazz go back to even before we stepped on the field at Guelph. We played football for the Metro Toronto Wildcats. Rest in peace to that great organization. James Roberts was a great quarterback for us. And obviously, a Yates Cup winning quarterback, and Jazz was in those Yates Cup games and just falling short. And maybe for a decision made between who started in 2014 going a different way, maybe we would have had your goose in that game. But I'm not going to talk about the past. But again, seemingly like how often at any level of football does the conversation of how good a team is come down to, do you have your quarterback? Do you have your coach?
Mhm.
Everything else can kind of figure itself out. You have your quarterback, you have your coach. And again, this isn't a shot at Coach McNeil. It's certainly not a shot at Coach Galley. The other guy, maybe. But some great quarterbacks came through that program, but it never really solidified itself. And maybe it would have been Sean Law because, we're the biggest Sean Laws, this side of the province of British Columbia. But they didn't quite figure it out. So I think all we said about Coach Doria is true. And again, just really quickly, he's coming from that Queens program too, but recognizing like this isn't Queens anymore. I gotta put a team together for Guelph. What does this mean? But anyways, the Tristan Aboud is the guy. And I know I've talked a lot about my love of what Elijah Barnes did in that first year. And I've been on record saying that like this is a kid I can see winning an OUA MVP. And we'll be talking about Evan Hillock very shortly in a pod to come. And the Taylor Elgersma question's still up in the air of where he's going to wind up. This is a guy in Tristan Aboud, and they might lose some weapons on that offense. So we'll talk about maybe the whole offense. This is a guy in Tristan Aboud who, when we talk about top quarterbacks in the OUA, this is a year where we might be hitting the halfway mark of being like, again, depending on if Taylor's back and how Evan's dealing with maybe a bit of injury and some maybe weapons that have moved from his system. This is a guy that we might not, maybe we're not talking about him as the number one guy, but I think there's a very good chance we're talking about him for certain in that top three conversation. Because as well, I think he's certainly won that position over McCray, and how they use McCray will be very interesting. Marshall McCray, that is, but he is QB1 with a bullet in my eyes.
Yeah, without a doubt, especially with the reps that I saw him take against Laurier, against Mac. He is absolutely the guy. I think that he was already a stellar quarterback as of last year. You and I noticed that there was a number of throws that he was having some issues with. I think a lot of it was he seemed to be behind some of his receivers at times. I didn't see any of that. I think that he has taken a big step in his own development here. I think this is going to be a very big year for Mr. Aboud, and absolutely he is going to be in the top three of quarterbacks this year, and he might be fighting for not just that number three spot, but another one. I love the development. I love what I've seen from him. The confidence is there. I don't think that while Marshall McCray is still an outstanding weapon, by the looks of it, it still seems that they are going to continue using him in that run style offense, maybe a little bit of a throw here or there to keep defenses honest. But this is definitely Tristan Aboud's team. It's his show. And I have total confidence that he has the capabilities to get them where they want to go.
And honestly, like McCray has shown some incredibly special things, and not just as a weapon on the ground. Like he's shown some incredible arm talent, and maybe it's just a situation where maybe it was a boot just a cut above at a time in, the last 2 years to then get him slightly more of those first team reps. And it just that unfortunate thing where you get that slight advantage from your, not to say it was undeserved for a boot, but then that advantage getting some more of those first team reps becomes slightly greater and then slightly greater. And then, all of a sudden we get to where we are now being like, I don't really think it's close. Not this, and that's not a shot at McRae by
Well,
any means. Now, in terms of the weapons and in the way that you framed it as like maybe using McRae in some of those interesting run packages, because I think from all the things you mentioned, getting to see Guelph twice in the past week, that I was the most excited about is Isaiah Smith is back, baby, right?
yeah.
And the comment I made when you called me up, leaving the Laurier scrimmage, I think it was, or maybe it was against Mac, of talking about how he was looking back in his 2022 Rookie of the Year form or top rookie, I forget however that shakes out, is that I believe it was an ACL injury, and
Mhm.
he was obviously cleared to be back last year. But those are the type of things, ACLs, Achilles, things of that nature, especially if you're going under the knife, where like, yeah, maybe it's a 1 year to return to play. Some of those, sometimes that's a 2 year full process to try to be back to where you truly are. And also, they had the luxury of having such a stellar back group of backs, including the likes of Donovan Malloy, Caleb Sargent, my guy, Kanye Nethersall, and obviously what Marshall can do as that additional weapon. Like, what was it that really jumped off the page for you when you were seeing Isaiah, Canadian Saquon, which obviously has taken on a new sort of valence to it with what Saquon did last year for the Eagles.
Mhm.
But what was it that sort of made you be like, oh, again, we're back, baby?
To me, because in the inter squad scrimmages, it's all what they call thud. For those of you who don't know, it's essentially you wrap up and you don't take anybody to the ground. It's full speed for offensive and defensive linemen, but those skinny guys, as we like to call them, they're fragile. We need to make sure that they're okay. But Isaiah Smith, there was one in particular. Once again, I had the esteemed pleasure of being in the inside run period, like just behind where the coaches are. So I've got a perfect view of everything. And there was an outside zone, and Isaiah Smith is running, is reading, and then he makes a cut. And that speed cut that I saw went, his knee is healthy, he is back. Because he cut up, he found a gap and was gone. And I go, oh yeah, this is the return of Isaiah Smith. I think that even if you remember last year, they didn't use him until that week 3 game against Laurier. He was still trying to rehab a bit. And, oh, yeah, we were told, oh, he's good to go. We're just waiting. We want to wait for the perfect moment kind of thing. I wouldn't be surprised if exactly like you said, he needs as much time as he possibly can. Let's keep him off as best we can and whatever else. But whatever he has been doing, man, it seems like he is 100% back and ready to go. And when you look at Donovan Malloy, Caleb Sargent, Isaiah Smith, and even your guy in Kanye Nethersall. I mean, this is a outstanding running back room, probably as a whole, the best in the OUA.
I think that has to be the case. And when you add into the fact that, now I think we're entering the territory because that running back room, by all accounts, is coming back in its entirety, that we have no reason to suspect, aside from the unfortunate reasons that sometimes guys do end up losing a year here and there for, say, academic eligibility reasons or something to that effect. But as a running game in totality, this is where now I think we start to talk about the people who might not be back and also start to talk a little bit about the combine, because on that O line that I think you were touting, and I think I was right there with you, though you were a few, maybe a weeks ahead of me, was perhaps as good as any in the OUA. Western certainly had something to say about that in that semifinal game. We'll get into that one. But when we look at that O line from last year, I'm going to give you the floor right away because so many of these guys, you've had an integral part in bringing them into Guelph. Thank you very much, Tom. And getting to work with them in their sort of nascent years there coming in 2019, the likes of Ethan Pyle in the mix. What's sort of the word? And I know we're kind of going a bit off script because normally we do that CFL Combine piece at sort of own segment, but I think this is important because I think you're right that running back room is as good as any. But, as we know, it doesn't necessarily mean a thing. There's only one ball ultimately. So having
Mhm.
those five O line to open up gaps for, they were opening up holes last year that you and me could pick up 4 or 5 on a carry last year, right? Let alone if we're the type of athletes that they have back there. What's the word with the O line? What are we seeing? What were you seeing being at those games this week?
So I will say this right now. It's April 6th. Tommy Barakis and Mitchell Stretchinger will be all stars going into at the end of 2025. And I would not be surprised if one of them is an all Canadian. The technique that I saw from both of them, the agility, the athleticism, I was supremely impressed by the two of them. Mitch had been taking center snaps as well as guard snaps, with the idea ultimately being, if Ethan Pyle does get picked up and he does not come back, Mitch would be the new center for them, I'm sure. But he had zero issues playing center or guard there. I was really, really impressed with them. Alex Gordon was another guy that I was really impressed with as well. He was solid, not quite on the same level as the two of them, but still a very solid player. He's kind of the sixth man that was in there. And then surprisingly, the other guy that really impressed me was a first year kid by the name of Riley Thompson. He's another big body for them. I think he's listed, if I get this right here, at 6'4", 275. He looked a little bit bigger than that, if I'm being honest with you, and his footwork was fantastic. He still needs to obviously build up a little bit more muscle to really get going here. But there are issues, I think, with some of the second and third year guys. Issues is a strong word. I think there's more work that needs to be done with some of those guys in order for them to be truly ready to go. And that's kind of where this is coming to a head here. If Ethan Pyle and Daniel Hocevar come back, and you've got the way that I think this is going to go is left tackle Tommy Barakis, Mitchell Stretchinger at guard, Pyle at center, Daniel Hocevar at right guard,
Interesting.
and Alex Gordon at tackle. If that's the lineup, I think Guelph's going to be just fine on the offensive line here, but I'm questionable about who's in behind. I have been told that they've got eight or nine offensive linemen who are coming in to bring up a training camp number of, I think, 20 O linemen. So they will have bodies, but they're going to be very young. And we'll see. You know, you and I have nothing but praise to say for Coach Mike McDonald here, but there's only so much you can do in so much time here. So we'll have to see who wants to step up and play.
I feel like it would have to be us to do this deep dive, but it'd be interesting to look at. And again, I don't think, you talking about those second, third year guys is like you're comparing them. This is the same way we've talked about that Western O line. I keep going back to like the Zach Fry, Elliot Beamer, Phil Grahovic, and they filled those gaps extremely well, but it took like a beat. And in large part, it'd be interesting to see if there's like actually a trend there. Cause if you're thinking about recruiting, like O line again is one of those positions that when you compare it to other groups, like if you bring in a receiver, if you're a young guy and maybe you see they got some veterans out there that have been playing for a while, you still might say, yeah, but I can run a better route than any of those guys. I'll go and steal a spot. And that does happen on the O-line. But oftentimes, as a coach, you might be saying, man, this young guy, sure, might actually have better top end potential, maybe even a bit more physical than one of my guys, but he's been playing with those other guys for 3-4 years. That five as a whole, and frankly, I just described me fending off Andrew Pickett for a year at left guard for Guelph when he was clearly better than me. But I think that in part because I was playing with Matt Nesbitt and Matt Topin and Cam Wilhelm and Kyle Frazier for 3-4 years in some cases, where there was more of that trust there. I think on the O-line, I think it makes sense that you get those cycles, because if you're a young offensive lineman, you might be looking at a group of guys in their third, fourth year being like, man, I'm really going to, there's a good chance I have to sit for a little bit, and I might be better off going to a place where they want someone to play now and I can build that a little bit. But we can table that for another time. And I think what's so key, I mean, like if they get those guys back, I mean, like the sky is the ceiling, or however it is that you so beautifully frame that. And then because on the going to then the passing aspect of this Guelph offense, we already sung the praises of Abood. When we look at the weapons, obviously Kane Stevenson, it seems like he's gone, and just, hey, big salute to you, Kane. Like, what a career there. And I think him and Vashon, who kind of bring up next, a bit of a question mark with his status of whether he'll get picked up. The physicality they brought to really open up that run game and kind of make a statement of, I think, how Guelph wanted to sort of leave their mark, if you will, offensively. So again, shout out to Kane. Vashon Genesis, again, the question of whether he'll be back. But then you look at a guy like Willem Arsenault, who just took the top off of defenses all year long last year, and then guys like Ryan Ogilvy and Jared Tessier, who I know you were saying was looking really good, or is it Jacob Tessier? I don't know which of the Tessiers it was, but point being that even if you're losing. Even losing Kane Stevenson, and even if you lose Vishan Genesis and his career at Guelph marred with some injuries, but when he was on point, he was as good as anybody. You have a
Mhm.
guy who you have to be able to say, look, we can't let this guy get behind us. You have a quarterback who can throw it, make all the passes in the book, and a running attack that might be the best in the province. Even if you lose some of those top end talent that they might be at receiver, and they'll probably fill those gaps with some young guys, again, receiver is one of those positions that it can be a little more just like go into the system, young guy, like you here, learn your playbook and then just, what have you. I'm sure some receivers are going to talk about, oh no, we have chemistry and this, that, and the third. I'm sure they do. But again, the impact of that's the area of this team where offensively, along with the O-line, they might be losing some guys. But if that run game is good, I'm less concerned about the possibility of losing a Vishan Genesis in addition to Stevenson, who we know they're losing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, losing a guy like Vashon is always going to hurt an offense no matter what. There's a lot of hope that he might come back. And if he does, I think that'll just make this offense that much better. I did see flashes of what I thought were great things from some of the young guys in the receiving core. And there was one in particular, I think it was a double covered route in a Skelly period. And I believe it was Nico Jean Gaston who was able to out jump two MAC defenders on the goal line to secure a touchdown, which I thought was pretty impressive here. There's a couple of other things that I saw from folks that I wasn't 100% certain in terms of who they were because of some numbers, but there are some bright spots for sure on this receiving core, but I would say that's the biggest aspect of this Guelph team that I'm questioning right now. What's that depth look like? Who do you have? Obviously, Arsenault and Tessier have proven themselves and they are outstanding in what they do, but I'm really looking to see who's going to fill the shoes of a Kane Stevenson. Who would be the next guy up if, say, Bashan Genesis is the guy who's going to leave? So I'm interested to see where this could go, but I'm very curious up on that.
Totally. And this will be an interesting thing to see for Willem Arsenault. And again, like if you forgot, like he ended up fourth in receiving yards last year in the whole OUA, a year in which like we saw some incredible passing efforts by a number of teams, 7 touchdowns to boot, 631 in total, and kind of working as like one of a big three. And we were talking about, and I think again, you were slightly more bullish on it of like, where does this receiving core rank with
Mhm.
the Westerns and the Lauriers and like the Carltons in the mix? And so it'll be interesting to see how does it work now when the spotlight is on him. But again, when that spotlight's also being turned Eye of Sauron style to that run game, that's going to certainly open things up for them. And you mentioned like how tough it is to replace a Vashon Genesis and totally, and the impact Kane Stevenson had. Absolutely. Not to undersell that at all. But when we talk about the impact of bringing back people into this program, and you saw a lot of games from Alumni Stadium last year and the playoff game against Ottawa, and seeing a lot of the alumni coming back to those games, and that was great to see. But I want to just take a moment to shout out my guy, former teammate Alex Charette,
Mm.
strength conditioning coach and coaching up the receivers. And in specific, I want to shout him out because when I would watch Genesis and I would watch Stevenson, I'm watching these guys being like, oh, you know who they bloody remind me of is Alex Charette, because he's a guy who was super athletic but super physical. So he's the guy like whipping these guys into shape in the offseason and keeping them in shape during season, but coaching up these receivers to match what this team wants to do. And that was a team, again, going back to the Stu Lang days with Gally coaching us, where if you were a receiver on that team, if you were going to start, you better well know how to block. And I don't care if you're a slot guy and you think you're just speaking, you might just be told that you're coming across the formation and you're going to try and kick out an end, or you're going to help chip on a linebacker, or you're all these things that we see the Westerns of the world do so well with their linebacker, with their receivers. And so I think that piece of it really has me excited. Tom, again, the offense, I think we have all the reason to be super excited. And again, just harkening back to the fact that even those days where our Guelph teams were really strong, I still get into debates with some of my older teammates. I was joking around with Andrew Graham, seeing him at the Invitational Combine in Waterloo of like, yeah, the defense was always, and the special teams was the truly great thing of those teams. We ran the heck out of the ball. But you know what? Offense was, it wasn't what made us like the best of the best in those days or one of the best. It was defense. And this defense under Coach Barry has been really exciting. I want to pass it over to you in specific, talking about the way that when he first came in, we had a bit of consternation of seeing the way he kept shuffling guys in and out, and that it seemed like maybe there was a missed assignment here and there, or a guy, you'd have a missing player, or maybe 13 guys on the field, or just trying to figure that out. It felt like that got itself settled down, and we'll go into it momentarily, and maybe you'll take the opportunity yourself to do so. But when you look at the depth, especially in that linebacking and secondary core this team has, that is it seems like Coach Barry, and again, this is what they need to be doing offensively. You have all these weapons, put them in the right places, right? It seems like defensively, Coach Barry, as we've been seeing more and more of him in the system for Guelph or implementing his system, is such a perfect fit given the just treasure trove of athletes that he has to mix and match based on down distance game score situation.
Yeah, I think it's only going to get better as well. I know that Brandon Farrago and I believe Anthony Mortuzzo are gone. They are, I believe so. I know that Farrago for
Tuzo?
sure. I think
Farrago.
I think Mortuzzo might be done. We'll still need to see. The only guy that I know for sure is Farrago.
And Curtis Woodmansey.
And Curtis Woodmansey, Joshua Campbell, those guys are 100% done. But I've already started to see some guys who are ready to play and ready to kind of step up in here. Nick Parchenko, who was playing a defensive end type of position last year, has bulked up even more so. He is now at 290 and playing nose tackle and looks pretty damn good. He still has those capabilities and the mobility of a defensive end there. So I'm very excited to see what he can do from that standpoint. There's a few guys, and I think when we think back about Guelph still dealing with the injury bug as it was even last year, there's, I think, 4 different Guelph defensive players that I did not see at that Guelph Laurier because they were still healing from other things. Demetrius Masuka, which I just have to say, really hilarious that the day after the max scrimmage, you announced that he's transferring.
He
just
knew where
A1.
he wanted to be. He knew where he
A1.
wanted to be.
So Demetrius Masuka, who was coming off an ACL injury at McMaster, is still taking some time. I believe Gianni Green was also one of those guys in there. Robert
Oh, no.
Keys Wilson, I did not see because I think he's dealing with some kind of a sickness as well. Javon Jacobson, same type of deal, is coming off of something. So there was a number of key guys on that defense that I did not see, and they still played pretty well considering they're going up against Laurier. Now, what I will say is that these spring camps are very interesting in the way that they go about. You can't just outright say, oh, this team won or this team won, because a lot of this is getting those anywhere from those third, second, and first year guys as much playing time as they can, because this is a great opportunity for them. Give those starters who have proven themselves some rest and really allow who's going to be the next up. So in that setting, you'll see, hey, Laurier really won in this kind of setting, or Guelph really won in this kind of setting, but it's not always a true indication of what's happening here. Still, there was a ton of really exciting prospects on both sides of things. What I will say, I can't confirm this myself because, like I said, he was not there at that practice, but I spoke to a number of Guelph folks, including a couple of coaches, who said, write it down, guaranteed, signed, sealed, delivered. Robert Keys Wilson wins the JP Metris Trophy this year. That's a very big claim with some of the other guys in there, including a young man from Laurier that I will get to when we get to our Laurier exit meeting. But needless to say, there are a ton of athletically gifted and incredible playmakers on this defense. It's just purely going to come down to how healthy can Guelph stay, because that's what's really been bogging them down for a number of years now.
I feel like I only really paid attention to half of that because I'm just still so in shock of you saying that you don't think Tuzo's coming back. Papa Tuzo, I know you're listening to this. Come on, we can keep it off record if you want to, but we need to know what's going on here. Yeah. Okay. Let's try and regroup. All right. The Robert Keys Wilson thing. I mean, two things on that. Again, a name that I think kind of jumped off the page for a lot of folks, picking up 5.5 sacks. He's right at the 55, and not to give away the spoiler. To spoil what you were leading towards with your Laurier pick for someone who might be picking up a JP Metris, but again, hey, when anything related to the 55, you're going to be in good shape. So go ahead and peruse rosters if you want to get a little bit ahead on what Tom's going to be talking about with that. You mentioned some of those names that weren't in there, and yeah, the point about the spring camp and how you're utilizing, kind of figure out who's up next. It's not necessarily in preparation for the next year. It's almost in preparation for 2 years' time, or figuring out who's going to fill in for an injury. But as far as guys that more than ever now, with you mentioning with maybe Tuzo not being back, that just were such standout guys to see last year that weren't as familiar coming in. And again, partly I think the way that Coach Bear uses the system. Javon Jacobson, because the injury bug's been plaguing him for a little bit, but when he's been in, what a start he's been. Eunice Larry, loved seeing him last year, super physical. You mentioned Johnny Green, loved seeing the athleticism. But Kyle Simon Guerin, I don't know if he was participating all that much, but I don't know if it was field or boundary. It's kind of him and Anakin, don't call me Skywalker, Guthrie, kind of on the two corners, and then returning kicks is such a deadly combo of the two of them. Guys like that had me really excited. I was kind of hoping that Tuzo was going to be in the mix too, and even holding faith. And I'll kind of throw this up for is in your wheelhouse because we're talking Golden Horseshoe and more specifically Burlington football. But seeing Samuel Lane and just knowing, well, shoot, his older brother Ben Lane. I'm assuming it's older younger brother, both from Burlington. Lane, I don't know. They both end up at Guelph, both whatever. Again, kind of just hoping that it's in the genes or something like that. If Sammy Lane can kind of become partly what his brother was in the late 2010s for Guelph as well. Seeing some of those names, any of those guys in the back end that you saw there as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's difficult to really showcase or to talk about the DBs because completely fully admitted, I was with the O and D line the entire time.
As
I
you
was
should be.
one-on-ones with the O and D line inside run. I did not see any Skelly or anything along those lines. I did go back for the 12-on-12 period for sure, but I was very much kid in the candy shop where I'm sitting, of course, at the 55 and
Naturally.
looking on one side, it's the Laurier offense against the Guelph defense, and on the other side, it's the Guelph offense against the Laurier defense. And at certain points, it was lining up perfectly so that as soon as one play was done on one side, I could turn around. The other play was just getting going on the other side. So I was just doing this the whole damn time, to head back and forth, which was really just my happy place, if I'm being honest with you. If I have to think of something to get out of a traumatic scenario, I'll just be thinking of that, having an end zone view of both outstanding offensive lines. So
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't, all of that to say, I didn't get a solid enough look at some of the other defensive backs in names in particular, I should say. But I saw a number of outstanding plays from folks, and I saw guys who are ready and willing to go. And I am very, for the Guelph faithful out there, you should be very excited about this upcoming season because if things go right for them, they could very easily, regardless, they are a top three team in this conference. It's just who's going to come out with some of those, once again, jump ball moments, as we like to say.
I'm so bought into this team that I'm actually gonna go and buy some swag with the new logo on it. I'm all into it. Another name, Braden McDougall, another guy that I'm
Yes.
assuming will be back in the system, kind of hybrid linebacker type in there. Tom, we kind of talked about the guys in the combine, so I don't know if we really need a deep dive into sort of all that jazz, unless there's anything in specific about, say, Genesis that you're hearing. Before we dive into, we'll do the same thing we did with Windsor, and we'll do the same thing with Laurier and with Western, and then with Laurier, given that we have the schedule now, kind of go through that deep dive and kind of what we're making the 2025 schedule. Just to quickly talk about those playoff games for Guelph last year, starting off with the win at home against Ottawa, a game that we've talked about a lot. We brought it back up in the Ottawa pod, and a moment that when we were there at in Guelph, where for a lot of the alumni that were there and that we were kind of chatting with, and they're seeing like, wait a minute, isn't Ottawa have a backup quarterback, Josh Jansen, who Charles? Charles Asselin, like like who are these guys? The Ottawa GGs, and recognizing that on that day, in some ways, obviously a rainy, windy day is kind of perfect for them to just duel it out with Charles Asselin, King Charles, as one of the best running backs, and Guelph with one of the best stable of backs, and then recognizing that as far as passing the ball, it would be a tough day for either quarterback and Josh Jansen or Tristan Aboud. And Aboud struggled on that day. And it made all the sense in the world he did. Guelph made it out with the win. He was able to mitigate not turning the ball over. Guelph turned over Jansen a few times. And really, that was probably Aboud's only bad game. That Queens game, give it a lot of credit. That was a great Queens defense. And that's a tough place to play in Richardson Stadium. But really, I say all that, and we can talk more about the Ottawa game as well. But just to set up that he bounced back so formidably to then go into London and duke it out with Evan, almost like stat for stat, moment for moment. Aboud going 24 for 38 with 304, one touchdown, no picks. Evan 20 for 28, 314, two touchdowns, the one interception, the major point on the day. And I kind of alluded to it earlier. And Western just seemingly always has the ability to do this when it's winning time, the chips are on the table. We're over here being like, do they really have the guys to get after the quarterback? Who's that go-to pass rusher? Yeah, Nixon comes off the edge and all this. And I love my guy Marcus Robinson and Von Muhldorfer. But are they really going to do that against one of this great O-line, one of the great O-lines at Guelph? And they got to Aboud 6 times. And that's really the major difference in that one. But in the face of defenders trying to take his head off, for Aboud to bounce back off of that less than stellar performance against Ottawa, despite in the losing effort in London, man, it's one of those great moments that every coach in that situation, it's the classic, gentlemen, do not hang your head on this day type situation. Any kind of commentary on those 2 playoff games we saw from Guelph last year?
Yeah, I mean, you broke it down pretty beautifully here. I love the fact that we were at Guelph, Ottawa, because exactly like you said, we spoke to a number of folks, a number of Guelph faithful being like, what the hell? Why are we having such a difficult time with Ottawa? Being like, no, Ottawa's got some dudes. Ottawa's got some real serious players. And then it didn't help that there was an absolute freaking windstorm and actual storm happening at the same time as well to really limit the passing attack. But Guelph coming away with that one, I think, once again, you talk about how important and how impressive it is to have that kind of experience getting into championship games. And we'll obviously dive into this next week when we talk about the Western Mustangs in depth. But hey, yeah, Western, you're not great at sacking the quarterback. Well, just wait for us in the playoffs and we'll get back to you. And they do it every single year. And I think Coach Gleason must just be sitting back and saying, you guys think we were solid in the regular season? Just wait. Just wait. See what I got cooking for you guys. And it's really just outstanding to see that team year after year after year just perform.
Yeah.
Guelph, first time being back in the playoffs in a serious moment, a second round of the playoffs in a number of years. So some hesitancy there, I'm sure, some whatever. The one thing that I already feel sorry, especially for those offensive linemen, if Pyle and Hosevar all come back. That game against Western going into 2025 is week 2. Coach Mike is going to be going over that playoff game over and over and over again, saying, this is what we did wrong last time. So you thought that it was a playoff game that we didn't have to watch it. We were able to skirt that film session. Nuh-uh, it's coming back, fellas. You got to have to sit through that. That's going to be a rough one, but hopefully you can learn a lot from that.
Yeah, they thought they would just get their exit meeting and go home for the summer.
Yeah.
But you know what? I love how you brought up the experience piece on that too, because it's not uncommon for us to be able to say like, okay, hey, a team really turned it around regular season. They picked up those wins, couple 50-50 games. Maybe a win goes into the loss column. If you play it out 100 times, maybe a loss goes into the win column. Maybe 6-2 feels perfect. Maybe it could have been 4-4 at worst. It's worse. Maybe there's a version of this season that they go 8-0. And then you say, but then the next year you take that step and you get the playoff wins and all this, that, and the third. And to be able to pick up the win against Ottawa in a hard fought battle, the conditions being as awful as you'd highlighted. And then, obviously, as we always talk about, like you don't you don't beat Western until you beat Western. But coming darn near as close as you can, giving them as good a game. And there's something to be said of maybe, oh, you gave them your best game, you still fell short. But it's like, no, same way that in that Laurier game in week 3, they're able to say, guys, we might not have won, but don't you think that this team is out of our league? We are on the same level, and they can walk out of a playoff game in London saying the same thing. You're absolutely right. They're top 3, and now it's about recognizing how do we refine our game to be able to take that next step as we go into 2025, which we will do right now as we go through the schedule. And Tom, Coach Mike's going to have to pump the brakes a little bit on watching that Western tape because they're having to deal with Laurier at home week 1, August 23rd. It's Western on the road, Western week 2, August 31st. Then it's off to Windsor September 9th, back home for Ottawa September 13th, the team that's certainly wanting to show that they should have been in that game against Western in the semifinal, or maybe they would have been going to Laurier and Queens would have gone to Western. Put that aside. That's then the At the 55 Bowl, September 20th at McMaster. They travel to Ottawa to take on Carleton on September 27th, back home for Queens on October 4th. They finish off the season at home against York, October 18th. Tom, that is a hell of a schedule. I didn't really figure out where the bye week fell within all that. Maybe we'll figure it out as we go along. That is a mother effer of a schedule right there.
Yeah, and I believe if I'm doing this correctly, I think that bye week is week 8 in between Queens and York. So that's a hell of a stretch. Although having a bye week right before you get into potentially the playoffs would be nice. Anyways, certainly the hardest 3-week stretch in the entirety of the OUA as of this year. You start off with Laurier, travel to Western, and then travel to Windsor. That's a lot. And even when you look at all of this, travel to Western, travel to Windsor, travel to Mac, but travel again to Ottawa and Carleton. That's a lot of travel. It's a lot of things to go through. And this might be one of the tougher schedules that I've seen in a long time for these Guelph Griffins. But I mean, this is going to be one of those years where if you say Guelph is able to pull this out, if they are able to win the Yates Cup, if they do whatever, there's going to be no doubt of we went through the hardest possible schedule. We didn't skip anybody. It's not like we only met Western in the playoffs or whatever else. You're hitting every single top tiered team in this one. This is really going to test your mettle.
There's literally not a gimme game on there. There are games where we can say that you're better than a team here and there, but you look at, again, we were talking about with Windsor, man, on paper, we obviously are liking Guelph better than Windsor right now, but when you're at the end of the 401 under the shadow of the Golden Arches, the team with the blue collar, the gold swagger, Coach Don, JP Cercelli, that's a tough game to win. The Ottawa piece again with with Jansen, that defense and the fact that they want revenge from that playoff game. McMaster, obviously we're picking them to win, but huge rivalry game. I think what you were saying, it was like 7 fights when they were
yeah. I mean, those teams. I mean, you and I both know, like when we were playing. Obviously, we're in those championship meetings a number of times, Mac versus Guelph, but even outside of that, we did not like each other. There was a big rivalry from McMaster and Guelph for a number of years, and even how we predicted Mac to finish, and I'm still confident in that. What I will say is in that spring practice that I saw Mac versus Guelph, while yes, there were a number of like Bren's clearing fights, I did see in certain cases the very best that Mac had because they're getting up, because it's a rivalry, because it's everything else. So even if that is another win, like you mentioned, you will get the very best out of that team. And then Carleton's no slouch, Queens is no slouch, and especially with how York is retooling, like this is a very tough schedule.
Most certainly. I mean, Mac can only hope to win in a fist fight against Guelph these days, so they might as well be trying to,
move on. God damn it!
We are months away from the season starting. If you think that this is going to have a happy ending, Tom, you are sadly mistaken.
I just don't want to hear about it anymore.
Oh dear. No, this is a hell of a schedule, and it's just like this is going to be a year where I think similar. I think we were talking about this. I think we were talking with Coach Grant about his Ravens going into last year of like, hey, 6-2 last year. There's a version of this coming year where again, they can win every single one of these games. Like there's just that is certainly the case. There's also a version where they go 5-3 this year,
Sure.
but they still can win a Yates. So it's like when we get to the playoffs and it's all, again, wins and losses aren't all created equally the same way we talked about Tristan Aboud in the win against Ottawa versus in the loss against Western and how you measure up with those types of performances. At the end of the day, this is a Guelph team right now that has that their eyes should be set on, and I don't know what Coach Saria's messaging is in the locker room. I'm certainly someone where, I mean, in my coaching career, I haven't really been part of too many teams with championship aspirations. Shout out to the Junior Mustangs, though. Of like talking about championships. And again, I think Coach Grant, it was a beautiful thing he talked about of like, we don't use the word championship. We're talking about preparing week after week and this, that, and the third. But understanding like what neighborhood you live in and what tier you're in and recognizing that like this is a Guelph team that, you know, I don't, it's again, ultimately, this is, we've said this before. I'm going to say it again now, and I'm going to keep saying it until the end of the OUA season, unless something drastic happens and it's just an absolute just shit show of a OUA season. This year is setting up to be such an incredible year of OUA football, like must watch football across the board. Because I was catching myself from saying like, and I'll just throw it to you. Would it be it's hard to say. Would it be disappointing for Guelph not to be in the Yates Cup, whether they win it or not? Because one way or the other, you're having to probably beat Western or Laurier to get in that game, let alone beating the other to win it. And, with the way those two teams are shaping up, and we're going to be talking about Western next week, we're going to be talking about the champs in 2 weeks' time, roughly speaking. We haven't always been perfect on our timing of these episodes, but, there's no shame in losing to teams like that. The same way that we said there's no shame in losing the Western the way they did last year. At a certain point, though, and there's still youth on this team. They're not necessarily going anywhere. I don't see this window closing the way we've talked about with other teams. But at a certain point, like, what is success look? And I know we're talking about this on April 6th, and the season's like half a year away. But like, I don't know. What do you make of that part of this conversation?
Like, what does success really look like for these Guelph Griffins going into this year? I mean, when you look at this squad, and now that you've come out, I think as of last year, anytime it's a first-year coach, you're willing to give some leniency. You're really just trying to get your groove going. You're trying to do whatever else. You finished 6-2 last year. I think the expectation now is that you are getting back to form, and that maybe it's not, I don't necessarily think that if you go into this, you're thinking, oh, if they don't make it to a Yates Cup, that's a failure of a year. I don't think that's the case whatsoever. But the expectation now is that you continue on this path of success for sure. I mean, you've proven that you have the capabilities to do that. You've got the players to do that. And out of that, to be perfectly honest with you, we predicted the Guelph Griffins to go 6-2 again this year. That means in our case here, they're losing 2 out of those first 3 games. If you come out of that with 2 wins, even if you drop one to Laurier Western or Windsor, but if you win 2 of those 3, I think that cements you as being, okay, now going into this, we're still expecting you to be a top tier team and, top 3, top 4, whatever. If you win 2 out of those 3 games in that first 3 weeks, then the expectation in my mind is, yeah, you're going to a Yates Cup for sure.
And I think in so many ways, I don't want to say you have to win one of those first 2, but as far as again where they end up in the season, because this could be a year where I kind of hope that no one ends up undefeated in some regards. Although on the other hand, if someone does end up undefeated, it might be one of the most impressive undefeated seasons that we've seen in some time. But like I'm not going to say Guelph needs to get that number 1 spot. And again, this can bring back the conversation of should we go back to having 2 teams with the bye at the start? Whether they don't get that bye or not, whether they get that bye or not, I'm not going to say that they need to secure first place. That is not fair by any estimations. And again, with that week 8 bye, it's not even the be all end all. York's going to be tough in week 9, but you get a bit of rest, near there. If they can secure home field at least up to and possibly including the Yates, because with how competitive it is, you could see, a 3 seed knock or a 4 seed knocking out the 1. Because we have such great talent this year. I mean, God, Tom, if Guelph hosts No, I don't want to say it. I don't want to say it. I don't want to say it. But if you can at least host all the way up to asterisk, 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 possibly including that last game of the OUA season. What a position to put yourselves in if they can fight for that too, meaning that you probably have to win against either Laurier or Western. And as you said, it just winning one of those or two, one of those first two or two of those first three just makes the rest of the season that much more. It's not easier by any means, but there's that part of you, that voice in the back of your head that recognizes your scoreboard watching, your standing watching the standings as the season goes along, and knowing that you now don't have that much space to play around with. It doesn't. Again, I don't say all this to say that it's going to change the way they prep. If they go 3-0 to start the season, now they can be like, guys, we're in cruise control. No, nor if they lose those games, are they like, we have to change everything up. No, you prepare for each game the way you would anyways. But these are still human beings. You and I have been in that situation where when you start to get these expectations, and doggone it, maybe it's in large part my fault. Maybe I'm the one here putting the expectations on them. But I think anyone who watched that team last year and sees how they're tracking should expect that this team is going to be competing for a Yates Cup, because they bloody did last year. These are human beings, and these are young men. Frankly, these are children in so many ways. That knowing that you lost to the teams that you're going to be competing with at the very top early on, it again doesn't change how you prep, doesn't change how you prepare, doesn't change your desire to beat McMaster in week 5, at the 55 Bowl or all those types of things. But it sits in there, and it maybe you lose a bit of sleep every now and then, or again, if things get a little tight here and there. So it's so essential to me to start off well. It's not the be all end all, but man, oh man, would that put you in such a more favorable position.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to see with your experience, because once again, you and I have both won Yates Cups, and it's not very many people can say that type of thing. But what I'm interested, because if I can say anything between the similarities between 11, 12, and 14 when my teams won, is the idea that, like, maybe 11 and 14 a little bit more so, it was head down. This is just, we're game after game after game after game after game. And then only a couple of times did I actually make the effort to, like, poke my head up and go, oh snap, we're like 7-0 right now. We could be doing something. And then just as quickly as I did that, it's right back down to, okay, who do we have this week? Who do we have this week? Who do we have this week? And it feels very much like, at least from the outside looking in, you guys were the exact same in that idea of, while yes, you are always working towards a larger goal in the back of your head, it's never front of mind, because if you overlook anybody who's in front of you, they could ultimately end up beating you from that standpoint. So I think as long as these Guelph Griffins, and any team really, has that same kind of mindset of, well, yes, Vanier Cup champions, OUA champions, that's exactly what we want to do. We cannot overlook anybody who's directly in front of us here.
Well, to talk about my time at Guelph, 2012 was found money. We lose week 1 to you, and then we don't lose again until we duke it out with you at the end of it. And it's the same story in 14, except in 14, that's where we had those expectations, and it was a much bigger bummer losing to you week 1, and that Yates haunts me to this day. And frankly, Tom, you're such a nice guy that for all the pot shots I take at your team, you don't just lord over me constantly. The fact that you are a 3-time Yates Cup champion, two of which coming at my, chagrin. So, good for you, my friend. And just, if I may just take a moment to whomever's listening, just to say, Tom, you don't have to say anything to this, that you as a part of those McMaster teams have done vastly more for that university than any one part of that team will get the opportunity to do during their current form of that team. So, that doesn't, something that shouldn't need to be said, but sometimes, when I hear a thing or two happening on the online spheres, just to make it known that, you should proudly have that helmet in the back, not because that they owe it to you, but because, or you owe it to them, but because they owe it to you for what you and your teammates did in one of the most fearsome OUA football teams and just period of OUA football that any team's put together in the last 40 years, realistically. So again, it'll be interesting to see, and all the more reason I'm excited that it's Coach Surreal leading this team because I think he can navigate those waters. I think he can navigate the storms. And going back to this, the fact of people like Coach McDonald and Coach Clough and my guy and Charette being there, people who were part of those teams and being able to talk to them, like, guys, we were here in this well, not quite this locker room, down the hall in the old locker room, we're in a nice locker room, but on this field, in this school, in this city, this place we all love called Guelph, Ontario, the Royal City. It's shaping up to be a great year for them, and part and parcel just of a great year of OUA football. Just in general, OUA, you can send us checks at any time. I don't know how anyone else is promoting your game like a shadow of even how good that we do, but whatever. Tom, final thoughts on my Guelph Griffins, your Guelph Griffins, everybody's Guelph Griffins, before we call it a wrap on this podcast.
Well, first and foremost, my God, I appreciate you, my friend. You are just a stellar human being. Yeah, I think that Guelph has gotten into the spot of we deserve a spot at the table. I think that every other team is looking at these guys like, okay, this is a team to beat. This is a team that's going to be fighting for the top echelon of the OUA, absolutely. And that, for better or worse, there's going to be a target on your back now. Certainly last year, everybody, hey, it's a new head coach. We're not really sure what's going to happen, whatever. You've proved to everybody that you deserve to be here. Now everybody's going to be trying to take you down, just as things were. And best believe that you and I will be there for at least two of those first 3 weeks in there. We will be in the Royal City. We will be hopefully down at London to watch those games there, and we will have front row seats to see just how well these Guelph Griffins can play. I'm looking at the schedule at bare minimum. I think we're going to be at 3 games. So we'll have a lot of things to we'll be looking at a lot of these teams and a lot of this squad with very high hopes, to be honest with you. And yes, while this rivalry is very heated between Mac and Guelph, my time at Guelph, it's just ruined all my hatred for that school. I love that school. I love the people who are a part of it. So I hope the very best for these Guelph Griffins here. And 6-2, I think, is a very realistic goal for them to repeat once again this year.
Absolutely. And I think I mentioned this when the schedule came out. From my understanding, I haven't got an email about it. I don't think anything is confirmed. I think Guelph is aiming for that October 4th date, the Queen's game. I believe that's going to be their homecoming. But as the date that we will be celebrating the 10 years from winning the Yates Cup against those pesky Mustangs, the very Mustangs we'll be talking about next week in the penultimate episode, this journey to the very top in these exit meeting interviews, all on our way to the start of the season, which, gosh, cannot get here soon enough. But we will keep you entertained and educated on all things OUA football right here at the 55.